Here is my project for today. This is an outfeed table. I just moved in to a new house and a new shop, so I needed an outfeed table for my table saw. So as you can see, just construction lumber and some plywood. Here I'm doing some layout. I'm gonna build a couple of frames for the top of the table and a shelf, and then you'll see here in a little bit. I'll make the legs and notch the legs that to receive those frames. So here, just doing some layout, and then start trimming the legs or the frame to length. And I accidentally dropped a board there. So now I got all the frames, all the pieces for the frames cut and ready to go. And I had measured this before, but now I want to just go back and double check that in fact the legs need to be a certain height. So just double checking that. Um, Now I'll do the layout for the length of the legs, and then I'll get those cut out. The next thing to do here is um, do some layout for these notches that I want to cut in the legs. So I'm figuring out where I want the top and bottom notches, and then once I get that figured out, what I'll do is set up a stop block on my, and I just clamp a tube. So here I'm just setting the saw blade to the width of that 2x4. So here I'm setting up the stop block, and I just clamp a chunk of 2x4 to my crosscut sled here, and then I can cut all the notches the same way. Now the one on top, the one I was just doing, I just cut one line there, and then I'll finish that notch out with the bandsaw here in a little bit. But this second one, which is going to receive the lower shelf, you'll see I got a stop block here, and then I also got another chunk of 2x4. And the reason I do that is so I can just remove that and then move my board over, and then I know that my notch will be exactly the width of that, at least that piece of 2x4 that I'm using as a spacer. So first cut, remove the spacer block. Second cut, now the width of my notch is the exact right width. So then take that over to the bandsaw, just setting up the fence here, and then I'll cut all the notches. Now I have all the base, the pieces for the base cut and notched, and so now I'm assembling those frames. Start with the frames. So I got this square clamp there that I thought would help me line up all these corners and get them perfect. And so I drilled some pilot holes and then glued and screwed, and then I tried to do it again but I don't right at this point I don't really have a table to assemble on, and it's my frame's too big for the top of my table saw there, so just decided to just as easy to do it this way, just stand it up and um, glue and screw the rest of the frames just on the floor. And you can see here how those notches are working. That's the bottom shelf there. Um, and same thing, all the legs of the whole frame of this table is all glued and screwed together. And then there's the top frame. So thinking about how I'm going to do this, and I can't think of a way to drill all the pilot holes and then get it. So I'm just going to glue it and then drill my pilot holes on this one. I don't like drilling through the glue, but sometimes it just makes more sense. And then I'll clean up my countersink slash drill bit afterwards. But then just gluing and screwing here again. So what I'm doing here is I got some leveling feet for this assembly table. So uh, I'm drilling. I think this is like a 3/8 hole because I think it's a 3/8 uh, leveling foot. So drilling up the legs, and you'll see that these get kind of sistered up to the frame that I already built, which will be I got that coming up pretty soon. So you get those drilled out, and then I want to have like basically a counter board to put the T-nut in. So that's what this is. Now a little bit bigger drill bit here, and then I hold the quill of the drill press about where I want it to stop, set up my stop, and then now I'm just double checking with the T-nut itself, make sure I'm not going. I mean, I can go a little deep, it's not gonna hurt anything, but I don't want it to go too far. So that's what that was. And then just now I'm just drilling out the counter bores. And then just putting the T-nut in. And so you can see here I didn't video it, but I cut and fit these pieces of the frame. You know, I did this for a couple different reasons. One, just the heft. I want it to be kind of a heavy table because it'll be a sort of a workbench too, an assembly table. And so I'm doubling up all these 2x4s and gluing and screwing those in place. And then you could see that those are the pieces I put those leveling feet in. And then I thought I was going to need this jam nut that I had. So this is me just putting the leveling feet in. And then here's the other side. I flipped the base around, and then just the same thing on this side. Okay, so I got the table in place, and then the top of this, just like I said before, is plywood. So what I did here is put I clamped that in place to hold it there, and now I'm going to screw the top down because I don't really have a helper in my shop. So sometimes like a full sheet of plywood's a little bit more difficult to manage. And then I just use a straight edge here with the circular saw, and I'll basically cut this in half, and then the half that's not screwed down will end up being the lower shelf. And then so here I'm about to start leveling my outfeed table. Looking at is my table saw level, and kind of hard to tell from the video, but the table is quite a bit higher than the saw, and I'm starting to realize at this point, oh man, I built the table too tall. So I'm gonna have to trim the legs and redo the leveling feet, and I'm kind of bummed. You see, yeah, this realization here. So here, popping the T-nuts back out, and then I'll do a little layout for trimming these down. But that's what this is. If you can measure the table right the first time, and then this is totally unnecessary. So, but just using the Sawzall to trim those down. And then here's try 2, and it's short enough now that I can use leveling feet to level it up. And what I'm doing here is I like to have the outfeed table just slightly below, maybe an 1/8 inch. You can see it in measure here, but like an 1/8 inch below the top of the table saw. That way, if you're cutting a board or something's got a little cup to it, then it won't hit the outfeed table. And then once I get it leveled up, this is some layout lines because I want to transfer the slots in the top of my table saw to the outfeed. That way, when I'm using like a crosscut sled or any other kind of sled, the sled won't hit the outfeed table. So I got my router out here, and I'm going to measure the distance from the bit that I have in there to the outside of that table so I can adjust my straight edge accordingly. And then I'll get that clamped down on both sides, and then I'll route out these slots for that. For the jigs and sleds and stuff. Then put the table in place, and then here is the other half of that, the plywood. Just doing a little layout. I got a little piece of, I think that's just a chunk of, I think it's 2x4 I got in my hand there. But just measuring out that I need to cut because it's going to be, there's a frame there. So notching those out. And then it didn't show, but I measured the width of that, and then measured the opening, and it's not going to fit in one piece. So I'm going to have to cut that second shelf in half, and I want to put a support going across the bottom of that shelf. So that's what this is. I'm measuring a support board, and then I already put my crosscut sled away, which is what I prefer to use, but I don't want to get it back off the wall, so I just got out my miter gauge there. And then I get a couple scraps of 2x4, and I'm going to just clamp those to the frame of that lower shelf, which will help me so I don't have to hold the board up with one hand and try to screw it in with the other hand. I can just put those clamps there, and I'll just set my support on top like you see here, and then it makes it easy for me to line it up, get it square, and screw it on there. And then just split that shelf in half, and then I'll get it, put it in place, and then same as everything else, that's just screwed. I'll drill some pilot holes and screw that in place. And then oh, here's it's pretty late when I'm here working the shop. So here's my little man coming out to tell me goodnight. Okay, so here's the next day, and I want to put this roll of paper, like have a dispenser that's attached to that side I'm standing on, the outfeed table. So I'm just right there was figuring out how big of supports I need to have for that dowel, and I just bought some 3/4 inch dowel or thereabouts, and then now I'm making some hangers for that dowel. Is what I'm doing here. Sometimes if I'm going to make two of something, I'll just tape them together, like especially if there's small pieces like this. And I didn't show it. I didn't have very good video of it, but I just cut the shape out on the bandsaw and sanded those down. And then here's my dispenser for that table. And so I don't want that dowel falling out. So what I do is just a screw and a little washer to hold that in place. And then on the other side, it's not a through hole. So I also didn't get very good footage of me putting this vise in, but you see where I'm standing there on next to the assembly table is a vise, and so right now I'm just drilling some holes out. I got a Forstner bit for some dog holes. Don't know how much I'll use that because I've never had that before, so they're not very deep, but we'll see how it goes. So here was about to put some finish on, and you could see the finish all dried up. So now this is the following day after that because I had to go to the store and get some more. I just got some. This is wipe on poly, some satin finish wipe on poly. Just put a little finish on the table, and I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. So here's you can see that vise better from this angle, but here's the finished product, and that's it for this one. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.